Welcome to the Rethink Leadership Podcast, available on all platforms including YouTube if you prefer to watch. My name is Jeremy Blain, CEO of Performance Works International, Executive Director of the Transformational Leadership Acceleration Institute, and Managing Partner of Diversity Talent. My aim is to bring insights from leaders, experts, and highly talented professionals from around the world. Insights, stories, and advice from the front lines of modern leadership to engage, inspire, and mobilize progress back in the workplace. Every episode is a learning opportunity for us all. The Rethink Leadership Podcast also supports charities around the world. Each episode is in aid of a cause chosen by my guests, and to date I'm proud to say we've supported over 60 global and local great causes. Welcome to this episode of the Rethink Leadership Podcast with me, Jeremy Blain. Today's guest is Tim Green, a Canadian living in Japan and working internationally as a Neuro-Cognitive Leadership Consultant. He's also an entrepreneur, data scientist, lifelong learner and inventor, and he even explains two of his great inventions right off the bat. Take note, all of you wearing glasses and doing Zoom, Meet or Teams calls, that dreaded screen glare or light reflection, Tim has the solution. In his day job, Tim helps leaders solve their most challenging problems to build better companies through better data analytics that enable better decision making. Rather than, he argues, using unproven and false data that many do that may have wide-ranging damaging effects going forward. He accomplishes this by primarily applying the insights of neuroscience and psychology and through learning new strategies around data science that are empirically proven to work. In fact, he's a passionate mythbuster and debunker of the pseudoscience, fruitloopery as he calls it, that has invaded social media and popular books, especially in the business and consulting space. We go into that in a little bit more detail and pull out what needs to happen for leaders in terms of data analytics, data science, and making better decisions. Thanks very much for joining me. Please introduce yourself, your expertise, and how you champion appropriate research for leaders everywhere. And then tell us something about yourself that not many people may know.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me, Jeremy. First of all, I'm a 55-year-old Canadian, lifelong science geek, inventor, and perpetual student of basically everything, but especially my new passion of Neuro-Cognitive Leadership Consulting. My formal education is a Bachelor of Science in Psychology with a neuroscience focus, and then 35 years of sort of book learning and personal experimentation, because I've sort of been a self-student in many of the things that I couldn't learn anywhere else. The central part of my brand is about championing how to do the kind of stuff I do. It's mostly on LinkedIn articles and posts and YouTube. But the universal theme is basically about empirical validity and applying the scientific method to everything possible, because it can be done as that, right? So beyond that, I would say, I think I answered everything you said or asked. A little bit forgetful, but the next one is about things that you probably don't know about me, and that is I was born in a car. That is not an exaggeration. That is indeed the truth. And that my nephew is a Cirque du Soleil or a retired Cirque du Soleil professional tumbler and world-ranked gymnast, or was. And I've got some ones regarding sort of my sort of professional stuff, and that is that I consider everybody I meet a personal teacher, whether they're 2 to 92 and whether they're top leaders or entry-level beginners.
Wow, God, there's so much to unpick there, Tim, I have to say. And one thing that I will come back to, actually, not just your nephew being the Cirque du Soleil tumbler and professional gymnast, but you mentioned that you're an inventor as well. Tell us something that you've invented.
Oh, so many things. Well, let me just start with this. This would be, I don't know if you can see it all right. This is just magnets stuck onto my remote control so I can stick it onto my mic stand. Lots. Unfortunately, none of them have actually become commercial products, but I'm surrounded by small versions of inventions. And one more is this. You might notice that you can't see the reflection if I had my ring light on, which I don't, because I've pitched the lenses at 45 degrees. So to basically remove the ring light, but keep my ability to see.
Oh, Matt, that is absolutely incredible, he says with reflections in his glasses. So maybe I can be your first customer for tilting my lenses or
There you
doing
go.
something with them. Anyway, that's amazing, Tim. Well, you talked about empirical validity, and you're a strong voice against so-called unvalidated scientific research that purports to be
Mm-hmm.
the answer to all questions that leaders need without actually going anywhere as far as the how-to goes. So could you
Mm-hmm.
explain this more using your uniquely evolved fMRI approach to detect the useful versus the nearly useless in data terms?
Sure. Well, the gist is very simple. It's already proven elsewhere, and it's essentially a double entendre. So in fMRI really in neuroscience stands for functional magnetic resonance imaging, but in this model, it stands for fruit loopery, myth busting, results, and iteration. Do you want more?
Yeah, tell me more. Fruit loopery. We'll come back to that one for sure. But if why have you come up with something different to that? That with these different words in there, what do you kind of mean by that? What are you getting at?
Well, really, the reason I did that is because it calls back to the neuroscience. It brings attention to that because unless the people in your business do not have brains and therefore neuroscience is irrelevant, they do, and it is relevant, and it can inform the way they do things. Yeah, and it's just a mnemonic. There, I said it. So it
Right.
helps them remember.
And so why so with your kind of, if you like, um switched approach for fMRI,
Mhm.
how does that help you kind of detect the useful versus the useless in data terms?
Well, thanks for asking. Really, what it comes down to is it becomes a habit over time as I develop this sort of organically rather than intentionally for any purpose. And that is just getting in the habit of sort of asking the right question, saying, okay, how do we know this? It sounds cool, but before we go there, maybe we should talk about what fruit loopery is. That is the use of scientific words to make something that you're selling or promoting sound scientific without having any scientific validity behind it. And one of the most popular nowadays would be something like quantum causality. If you think it and you never stray from that thought, the universe will deliver it. That's utter nonsense and means that the person who says it doesn't understand anything about the actual science behind quantum physics, which has nothing to do with that. So,
Well, I'm not going to go anywhere near that quantum physics. So just coming back to your that exact point. So for
mhm.
those experts that get it right, what are the benefits of really understanding that in data terms? But what's the cost of poor research or people that don't understand what the data is saying or something like the quantum physics, as you say, and then start making conclusions?
Right. Well, I mean, if you want to get real results, it's got to be based on some real principles. So, the first part is detecting that accuracy, and that's mostly about asking questions. How do we know this is true? Can we validate it? And validation isn't going on social media and finding 10 people who agree with it, because it oftentimes comes from the same source, which is actually more of a social media campaign. Go to valid sources to check. And what the benefit is enormous. Like a lot of the conclusions I come to and a lot of the principles I go towards, it's like, oh, a Nobel Prize winner said that. Richard Thaler said this. Daniel Kahneman said this. Adam Grant said this. Many of the things that go back quite a bit further is Jim Collins has said many of the things that I use, the conclusions I've come to, but he said it 20 or 30 years before me. And that's another test, right? Is the test of time and consensus around respected sources. And most of the results I can refer to are theirs, not my own, because I haven't had the sample size, and I don't have access to Fortune 500 companies to get that same data from experience that they did. I'd be a fool not to find those kind of sources.
And I really like that. That sort of data, or that learning, or the research that stands the test of time, and a consensus of respect for that research that does so, and how it can evolve from there. So I really understand what you mean, is that you take away the Fruit Loops, who are just coming up with data maybe to serve their own purpose, or even in the most altruistic way, but don't understand what they're actually talking about. And you get to the real data that to then make some informed conclusions or statements or whatever that is. So once you've identified or removed the Fruit Loopery, which I love as a term, let's go to the second stage. So how do you go about myth busting to debunk the pseudoscientific myths and the created realities that might not be realities? Fake news, I think we call it in modern parlance.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually a better, simpler term for it. But I mean, mainly by detecting it as Fruit Loopery in the first place, you're a large portion of the way there. But what I find really helps to myth bust it is to share out. It was like, this is interesting. You're saying this. Where are your conclusions coming from? Or here it is. Here's a concern, question, or problem or doubt I have. Can you answer this? So what I found when I've actually tried to do that, or even offered to scientifically shore up some claims which I had serious doubts about, I tend not to hear back from those sources, which to me is indicative that they knowingly are just keeping quiet about that. Now, you made a really important point, I think that is lots of people with great intentions simply don't know it's not valid because they just saw it online or wherever. They took it as something true because they've seen it all around them. And this is a natural tendency. This goes into sort of social psychology and Robert Cialdini and stuff. It goes into, well, if everybody's talking about it, it must be true, because not everybody could be making a mistake. And that's leveraged. And, Cialdini is sort of the godfather of marketing, persuasion, and influence. And he shows very well that's exactly what can happen through things like social influence. So there's that, and then calling it out publicly. That's what I do on a lot of my content. Is my YouTube is, okay, here's some stuff, here's what works, here's some questions, or if you're not sure if it's real, do this. So that is, give people tools to how to do pseudoscience detection or Fruit Loopery detection.
I love that, Tim. And I mean, for me, it almost strikes me as another word for myth busting is that validation step, isn't it? The validation of the experts, the validation of the expertise that is being spouted itself, the validation of the research or the fact that they've seen all around them, to get to the point where you can move forward with something that is much more solid, grounded in proper data, validated by other data sources potentially as well. So I really understand that. And once you've moved from that, you move to your third stage, which is results. And of course, results is all about now. And we talk about results through being data-driven leadership. But you argue that we should really get back to this sort of results-driven leadership underpinned by validated data, because not all data is created equal. So that data-driven leadership can be wrong, to your point before. So can you explain a little bit more about that and give us some maybe examples of where it's worked and where it can go wrong most commonly?
Sure. Let me first of all be clear about results-driven management as it's widely meant. I'm just going to be straight up. I haven't read any books on results-driven management. Hundreds of books, but not one on that. So what I mean by that is sort of my own version of it. And it's really about managing to or towards results and then from results. That is, everything's coming somehow from real world results rather than speculation or models that haven't been examined. You haven't questioned it. You've just went ahead and plugged it in as a multi-million-dollar initiative in your company, and you're just hoping this flavor of the week works out.
Who
And
have you
for
seen getting that right, Tim?
Okay, so just as an example, I've already mentioned people like Jim Collins, Daniel Kahneman, basically anything, especially if somebody's made a prediction in the past. Probably my favorite right now that I would point towards is Philip E. Tetlock, which is a researcher that was cited in Kahneman, Kassar-Sunstein, and Oliver Siboney's most recent book, Noise. And he talks about, I take books and take their references to learn from other sources. And Tetlock's book about super forecasters, and now what's called the Good Judgment Project, it has nailed it, because they not only look at results, predictions, and then results, but they not just record successes, but they also record failures. So you actually have an objective track record, not based on hype or emotion, that anybody is subject to, including scientists.
That's fascinating, and of course, then you get that double learning point, don't you? Is what makes it a success, but what are the things that or the traps that we shouldn't, or we should be aware of next time, so that we can move forward. So that's from the book Noise, did you say, Tim?
Yeah, that was yeah, like I said, long, but we'll just give Kahneman, because everybody knows who he is. He's the sort of front runner in terms of fame there. But yeah, it's a book that basically talks about how, if you've read Thinking Fast and Slow, which I would also super recommend because it's exceptionally good. But Noise is sort of his other answer, which is our inconsistency from day to day in our own judgment is noisy. And he points out that it's actually even a larger variable than bias when it comes to that changing, and then the techniques that we can do, especially tapping into group intelligence, to minimize that. Like from day to day, our mood can affect our judgment. And he has, of course, data to support this. This isn't just some fanciful theory not based on data. It's all based on data.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. And of course, once businesses and once leaders get through that and they've got the data to make informed decisions or move forward, this is where you argue that fourth step, the iterative improvement, is possible at speed. Could you explain that a little bit more about what you mean by that, and how the
Right.
most successful leaders take it forward to make it work in reality?
Right. So first of all, that's the part that comes about the managing from data, right? You want to go somewhere, you have to know where you're going and identify the relevant data, not just the vanity metrics. But then once you've got those results, say, okay, now let's look at these results and how can we do this better based on data rather than arbitrary? Let's 10x it. Well, if you can 10x what you're doing now, that means you are doing something substantially wrong in the order of 1/10 x before. So that's pretty arbitrary versus, okay, derive what you're capable of increasing. But it's always about looking at that historical data, then doing things like are cited in Noise and other things, where you do proper, not groupthink, but brainstorming and group collaborative thinking with psychological safety and radical honesty, things like that. If the junior part, and this is where I'm going to invoke Ray Dalio, because he's likewise a genius, and his book Principles is what really got my attention, where the lowest person in the room, it could be the janitor, if he has credible evidence that something is wrong, he is contractually obligated to put up his hand and tell Ray he's wrong. If it's credible, and if he does not do that, having that knowledge, he can be fired for not doing so. So it's all these sort of things. It's sort of like dissent, and this goes into Google's research when they said psychological safety is a top predictor of teams. So when you have a room full of geniuses, the differentiating variable then becomes that psychological safety. Can you tell the recognized smartest person or senior person in the room they're wrong, or at least you have a doubt about what they're saying? So that's really where it goes managing from data, and then with your well-considered conclusions, moving forward and reiterating. Now, this can be done on a personal level. It becomes a habit, just sort of like, oh, I just figured out a way to save time on the way I manage my spreadsheets or my time. I'm going to share that with everybody, including, of course, feedback if people don't agree, so that it can be made better also.
It's a very empowering approach, actually, for all levels. Like the janitor that you talk about, if I've got that credible data or knowledge, my duty of care to the company, to my contractual obligation to you as the leader, is to say it, whether you like to hear it or not, I suppose, in some way, shape, or form. And that's where the psychological safety underpins it as well, so that I am able to do that without fear, and being very open. And you mentioned something that I must say I've not come across it, although I think I understand it conceptually. Can you just help me understand a little bit more what you talked about as radical honesty?
Radical honesty is exactly what it sounds like. It's not about, and people like Daniel Pink talk about it, Reed Hastings and I can't remember her name, something Meyer in No Rules Rules talk about it. And they're great examples of this sort of iterative empirical approach, where it's sort of like, I'm sorry, Jeremy, but what you said is wrong, and here's why. But it's not about being disagreeable. It's not about personally criticizing you. It's disagreeing with you, but in such a way where it's actionable and specific. Saying you don't know what you're talking about is counterproductive, not actionable and personal. Saying, okay, I'm sorry, but this isn't going to work. Here's what we can do to test it, because I see other things. Now you're focusing on the problem. So that's the main thing. You're being radically honest, and it's still going to probably get emotional, but by focusing on the solutions and the problems rather than the people, and focusing specifically on how actions that can be taken, is what makes it radical honesty. It isn't hurtful personal jabs. It's radical honesty about that which you're aligned on. Like, we want to succeed at A, B, and C. What you're saying isn't going to work because of X, Y, and Z, or at least I don't think it will. And then giving suggestions as to how to test it.
I've been making a lot of notes here. You talked about at the beginning, learning from people from 2 to 92. I'm here. I've got 4 very clear actions that I've learned today. Well, two of them, which is actually to build my knowledge a little bit more, because I clearly have a couple of gaps here. But some very sensible ways forward from a data action perspective as well. So, and I'm sure it's the same for those tuning in, Tim. So for those, what would be your 3 to 4 main takeouts of what we've covered today that you'd like to reinforce, which people can take forward?
Sure. Well, I'd like to start with something before those 3 points, and that is, you were talking about knowledge gaps. That's an inevitable and perpetual thing, right? If we're not continuously learning, then we're being perhaps honestly foolish, because we think we know everything and nobody does. So, everybody has knowledge gaps, certainly myself. As far as the 3 points I'm going to make, is that nothing is everything. When somebody says, it's all about mindset, mindset is critical. But a Buddhist monk sitting on a mountain with perfect mindset is not leading a company. You can imagine as hard as you want the perfect attitude about being successful, but if you never get off your butt and take action and bounce that against the real world, it doesn't mean anything. Nothing is everything. And that's how a lot of things are sold nowadays, especially in consulting and solutions. And it's just, it's not sincere, and the data doesn't support it. Kahneman references that. It's like, it always, in retrospect, sounds like that was the key solution. He says, that's great, but if that's true, you should be able to do that in forecasting. And Tetlock and Kahneman have both pointed out that's not the way it really works. Of course, it's easy to explain something after you have the 20/20 hindsight. Doesn't mean it's true. It just means it fits the story well. Second one is to base everything you can on empirical results. either your own or reliable and verifiable sources, right? You can't always have the luxury, nor should you reinvent the wheel. But if you have your own experience in your company saying, here's what we've got, here's where we want to go, let's use this to make that better, that makes the most sense because the variables are controlled. It's your company. If not, use the best sources you can find. And then that leads to the third one, which is start small, get results, and scale up. And because this is sort of 3 is a neurocognitive sweet spot, I found in experience and a little bit in the research regarding our memory, I'll stop there.
That's well, some very good tips there. I totally agree with you around the mindset. Mindset is important, but mindset without the behaviors that follow from that to move to action and to implementation, or whatever you want to call it, is where actually many strategies and many leaders fail, because it becomes all words, doesn't it? Yeah, it's like I've got a great attitude, but I'm not going to do anything. It's that's not going to help anybody. And as you said right at the end there, being empirical results driven, starting small to get results and then scaling up. That's a really good piece of advice for those of us who are not data scientists, who are learning this and continually learning this. It's a great way of moving forward. Let me just ask you one more question, Tim, on your background there. For those of you who are tuning in on Spotify or Apple or Audible, you won't see this, but on the YouTube views, we'll see Tim's background has Crush It Club 303 behind him. Can you explain what that is, Tim?
Sure. This is just at the time of this recording, at the time we did this interview, it was the most recent episode of my YouTube channel, and it's all about the kind of things I'm talking about here. This one was actually, do I have time to explain a little more? Sure. So this is actually a secondary book from another Patty McCord, who is also parallel to Reed Hastings. She was basically the head of HR, or the head of talent. So it's the no rules story told from a different perspective of a different person, and how she was one of the co-developers of Netflix's more or less revolutionary and iterative and empirical process, which has made them so high performing, including especially the radical honesty. So
interesting.
Freedom and responsibility.
Stuff. Right. Okay. So how do you, what's the do you have a page for that? How do people find it on YouTube, or just put it into YouTube?
Sure. It would be crush-it-club. I believe I'm the only one who's got Crush It is very common. Thanks, Gary. That's where I was inspired by it. But besides Gary V, it's the only channel I know that has Crush It Club. So you should be able to find it there. If you provide them with links and stuff, that would be great. And they can certainly find it there, or they can reach out to me and I will point them in that direction.
Well, for those of you watching on YouTube, you'll see the links at the bottom of the screen right now. And for everybody else tuning in, Tim, that would love to continue this discussion with you, get in touch. How do they do that?
Well, the very best way to get an immediate response and engagement would be the LinkedIn chat. So, connect and ask for a connection request. And I will do that unless you try to sell me something right away, in which case I will remove you from my network, because that's not what we're about. And that's not what I wanted, the kind of relationships I want to form. So then the next one is you can book me for a call via a Calendly link, which I've already provided to you. So that will be accessible to them. And if you want to do something a little shorter, just say, hey, let's get 15 minutes. Is Tim one of the Fruitloopery guys or something else? Because if it doesn't, I don't know who first said it, but all plans only endure till first contact with the enemy, or something like that. So unless this is a good match for you, let's take 15 minutes to find out if that's true before deciding to move further. And that will just be a short 15-minute Calendly link.
Fabulous. Well, Tim B. Green, thank you so much for joining me today. for teaching me so lot. I've got a list of things that I now need to go and learn more about, clearly. And I'm sure it's the same for everybody else who's listening today, tomorrow, in the future. Thanks very much and goodbye.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blain. Please like, comment and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.